Hello and welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast. Our conversation today is with Angie Holbrook. Angie is a retired colonel from the Army as of 2019 and is now working in a consultant role. Angie comes to us with some great topics she's incredibly passionate about, specifically your tribe and your military transition. We talk about in this episode how to build a tribe and how to cultivate that even after getting out of the service. We also get to talk about her transition out of the service and how it's been different than she expected. She spent a lot of years coaching people on getting out of the military, and it turns out getting out is much different than she thought. We get to dive into how she tackled those problems and her suggestions for people as they get out. I do want to give a shout out to Tom McCarthy, Tim's dad, who orchestrated our new song intro we've had the last couple of weeks. He put together an original piece of work for us specifically, and I think it's weirdly given us a big boost of validation in the podcast space. We're legit now. We've got our own private orchestration, and we're taking it to the next level. I also would like to extend the offer to connect with us. We love getting emails from listeners and are looking to introduce some new show types with varying subjects, not just interviews. You can reach out to us at scuttlebuttpod1@gmail.com, and that is in the show notes. Send us an email. We'd love to reach out and talk. Love taking requests for interviews and different subject matters. So reach out to us there and we'll be in touch. For now, please enjoy this conversation with Angie Holbrook. Angie, it's really great to have you on the show today. Really looking forward to our conversation. You were referred to me by one of our previous guests, Kate. I want to kick off our conversation just with starting with an interesting quote that you have on your LinkedIn, actually. Find me at the intersection of empowering people and building stronger teams. Can you start out with what does that mean? And I guess, how do you perceive that?
They tell you when you're transitioning, you should have some kind of flashy line, but I transitioned a little before the flashy line started popping out there. But I started thinking about, what do I want people to know about me? And as I was an athlete growing up, and I played a lot of different sports, but I got to be honest, I really enjoyed the team sports a whole lot more than the individual sports. And so those are the places I like to find myself, is playing on teams and figuring out how, all of us are better, than one of us kind of, idea. And so the whole team concept, which really plays well into the military when you think about how we accomplish stuff in the military. So team building is a huge part of the things that I like to be, part of, and for the most part have had a lot of success with. So anytime I can play on a team, like I like to play golf, and I like to, tennis and some of those other things, but I much prefer to have other people, so that I don't always have to, my issues don't become the whole cause of the failure or even success, if that happens. But I just enjoy playing with other people on my team with me. It's a great sense of, I feel like I learn something every time I play on a team, and I like learning new things. So that's a big part of why. And anytime you can see other people succeed through some interaction that you get to be a part of, that's also that gives off energy, and you take away from that, and you grow from that as well. So that's that empowering others and then building the teams from that. It's been a huge part of my life.
Spent 27 years in the Army and retired in 2019 as a colonel, if I have that right. And you kind of mentioned the Army and maybe the military collectively as a team sport. Do you think it's an individual sport in any way? It's a team. You kind of have that bonding sense, but I think that in a lot of ways, it's also kind of every man for himself on a lot of things, in terms of like maybe your own professional career and development within the organization.
Well, I think sometimes, your skills, you have a responsibility to your individual skills that you bring to the equation, I think. And so making sure you're doing the things that hone those skills, that improve yourself, that just builds to the trajectory of the team when you're bringing your best stuff right to the game. But I mean, I never felt alone. I think that's probably another thing that about the team concept or the tribe concept that I like to take away is that you're not in this by yourself, and you've got other people. When you're low, they can help bring you up to the, up to even keel, or head above the water, and you're doing the same thing for them. So and that's a huge part of it. So yeah, I think you've got a personal responsibility to make sure you're bringing your best, but you want to do that so your team can be the best, I think.
What does that look like from, I guess, the officer level? I guess Tim and I were both spent our entire time enlisted, and I think it's easy to see that the ability to kind of lean on other people, like in peer roles, and maybe like kind of one up, one down, but you're much more by yourself, I'd imagine, especially like maybe towards the end of your career when you're the one in charge and you're maybe looking for somebody to lean on, and there's no next person up the chain.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel that, or kind of experience a lack of that team at that level?
Well, I think certainly when you're in a command position or at the top of an organization, which I was very fortunate to get to do several times in my career, you have to find spaces and pockets where you can, steal away from being, on the platform, so that you can recharge your batteries and get, like-minded people and with kindred spirits, people that you can share your struggles with. But yeah, there are times where it's very lonely because the decision is yours and you have to make it, and it'll affect people's lives and outcomes. And so, I mean, yeah, there are times when it is it can be a lonely existence when you're, in charge of an organization. But again, that's where I think it goes back to making sure you have parts of your life where you can, go to other people, and they don't have to be in the military. Maybe, for some people it's, maybe somebody in their church or a pastor or a counselor or somebody like that you respect, that you can just go and kind of open kimono and share your struggle with, and then be able to get back in the game and get back into the, role that you're playing, and feel a little bit more energized about the things that you got to do that sometimes are very tough.
Tim, I would love to hear your take on this, but I don't know if I just spent like my entire time in like realizing maybe that all of our senior like officers or whatever like weren't actual people, and like they didn't really have problems, but like going through all like the podcast or whatever and getting a chance to talk to some people that are in higher positions way more than I did while I was in, I'm like, oh, like I had that exact same problem. But you just maybe don't hear about it as much.
I think that with my first squadron, it seemed like all of the officers, the CO, the XO, like all the department heads, they were kind of just like these mysterious figures that like when they walked in, you just like stood up and shut the hell up. But in my second squadron, that's when a lot of like the pilots and like the higher end officers kind of were, they were more engaged with the enlisted. And so I think that that's when I kind of realized like, oh yeah, no, these are normal people with like normal everyday problems. This is their job. You know what I mean? But Angie, I agree with everything that you're saying. I think that that's something that Brock and I were super lucky with, is that we did kind of find our group, our tribe, so to speak, relatively quickly. And it makes a big difference. That can like really make or break a person, is if you have that support system, that group of people that you can kind of like you said, lean on, excuse me, you can lean on them when you're down, and they can kind of pull you back to baseline, or vice versa. You kind of pull them up, and yeah, it is very interesting to hear a colonel talk about, having these same issues. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
There's often a dichotomy that people talk about, do you want to be loved or you want to be feared,
Right.
as a leader? And I used to have this diatribe with one of my senior officers that I, worked for in the latter part of my career. who incidentally is still in a very high position in our military. And he would always say, no, I want to be feared. And I was like, no, I'd rather be loved. And not because, you know, I feel insecure or I need that or whatever. I mean, I think we all want to feel valued. But to be loved and probably to be a little feared too. There's a trust that has to happen there. And I think my my leadership style is a more collaborative. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to hear what I knew the best ideas usually came from people that were having to work the problem every day. And I can't just fly in and go, oh yeah, here's the solution. Boom. You know, you need to really listen to the people who do this on a regular basis or do this on a daily basis to really, you know, find out how we can solve the problem for good, not just solve it for now, you know? So.
Yeah. I think that there's really something to be said about that whole, like, as a leader, do you want to be loved or do you want to be feared? I would take loved every single time, because I think as far as being a leader, anytime I've ever been in any sort of like a management or like a leadership role, you'll get a far significant improvement in production when you're loved, because that means the people under you, they care enough where they don't want to disappoint you. And so like every good leader I've ever had, whenever I'm, you know, not hitting goal or whatever, I'm not getting the work done, one of my first thoughts is, oh, I'm letting so and so down. And that's a significantly better place to be in as somebody on the, you know, being the worker, to want to not let your leader down, versus if I don't get this done, I'm gonna get my ass chewed or whatever. It's two different forms of motivation. And so speaking from personal experience, that's how I decide to lead any position I'm in as a leader. I would much rather have my guys want to get it done because they care about me versus because they fear me. Plus, I'm not a very scary dude, so it makes it hard.
Well, and if you know this, your good leaders are doing the exact same thing.
Absolutely.
On the other end of the spectrum. They don't want to let you down. They want you to be proud of, you know, you and the organization that you're part of. So yeah, if you're both working at that from that mindset, yeah, you're going to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think that there's that statement is so bad too, like the loved or feared, because you can be loved but still like respected at the same time. Like it's kind of almost implying that those are at odds, but they're not. And you know, like you said, Tim, the motivation is there, and I think that it's not just letting your boss down, but like knowing that, hey, they respect you, but they also respect, like, hey, I don't have any problem getting in your face. If you know, we're friends, but like there's no question about like who's the boss or whatever. When I worked at Angie, I guess a little background on me, I worked at a call center for a few years, and I was a manager supervisor with this other woman, and she just like ruled with the iron fist. Like she was that, like, very proud to be that one. She was number one, like the top manager in the entire center. But like every single one of her employees, just, they had this look on their face that like if they did something wrong, like one toe out of line, and they just came to work scared every day. And, you know, I like came in second as like a team or whatever. And my people were like happy to come to work every day. And I'll take that every day of the week. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
Well, and I think anybody with kids can tell you, or even like thinking about your own parents, you can be both. Like you can be loved and feared. Like my daughters will tell you, you know, they love me, but when stuff's getting out of line, they fear me. You know what I mean? It's so you can be both too. I suppose.
Yeah, people have stood in front of my desk for UCMJ before, and I think they would probably they know when we're not kidding anymore. We're not joking.
Yes.
It's serious business. So yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You mentioned one of the things that you think is a good way to kind of avoid, we're talking about everything we were saying before, where you go to the people that are doing the things every day and kind of relying on those as like your maybe your subject matter experts. Would that characterize a lot of like how you led throughout your time in, or is that something that you came to kind of learn over time?
You know, when you first start out, obviously my experience has only been from the officer side of the house, but when you first join, or you first, you're a platoon leader, a lieutenant or something, you don't want to mess up, right? You want to do your best. Everybody wants to do their best. And you probably think, I would say probably that first year and a half, I was trying to do everything better, faster, everything. And I had a really good platoon sergeant, and it's usually a good NCO, that takes you aside and goes, ma'am, I'm not going to let you fail, and you're going to get the great OER. You're going to get all that. I'm a success when you're a success. And when I got that, and we were like a power team after that, because I knew he had, 15 plus years experience in what we were doing. And if I listened less, if, two ears, one mouth, if I listened more than I talked, we could probably get a lot further. And it just taught me a lot. And I kind of I think I carried that into the rest of my career from there, about how, listening more than talking is important, and listening last, or talking last, because everybody wants to please you, right? And if you come in and you start espousing your thoughts before you let other people talk, you won't get the truth of what you want to hear from the people, because they want to please you, and you'd rather hear really honest their opinions of how to make something better.
Yeah, in so many circumstances, I've been in like a Tim and I both worked in aviation, and been in several production meetings where you have like a new ensign, or 01, 02 or whatever, and he comes in and just is like, starts thrashing like senior NCOs, and like saying the way things are going to be. And it's like, oh, that was not very smart. Like that. You're talking to somebody that's been in for 30 years, and like they literally can do this blindfolded. And there's just so much experience there that is kind of being neglected, and probably doesn't take long of doing that before you get your butt handed to you. Did that ever happen to you early on? Like, did you ever really have to eat your words on something?
Probably early on. I started my career out in air defense as an air defense officer before I changed over to human resources. And I remember this old crusty warrant officer. He used to say, "I got socks older than you," and it was he was like probably a little bit older than my dad. Maybe he had been in Vietnam, and so rather than thinking I knew everything, this guy who had to call me ma'am, he reminded me that, I was here when you got it, I'll be here when you leave, kind of thing. So it was just a perspective that helped me, kind of think about things before I jumped out there and, tried to prove myself a little bit too hard or something. So, yeah.
I was talking about how in my second squadron, I realized that the officers were kind of normal people. That was the first time I remember seeing for the first time a chief, or like an E7, kind of lay into this ensign, or maybe he was an O2, but he kind of, they were going back and forth, and the ensign had tried to kind of pull a power move. And I remember the chief calling him by his first name, like, "Listen, John, this is what we're going to do. I've been doing this for 23 years. You just got here. Like, that's not the right way to do things." And the officer was like, "All right, chief." It's like, sounds good. And I was just like, oh my gosh,
Yeah. I think when you realize that disagreement is not disrespect, I think that's another huge thing that it takes time to learn as well. And then remind yourself why you're both there, right? Or why you're all there, to get the job done, right? And get it done well and right. So if we keep that in perspective, we can get our egos out of the way. So
I hear what you think about, you were just making a comment about somebody kind of dissing you a little bit, like I got socks older than you. Like, Tim and I have talked so much about, there's a very large cultural dynamic in the military about how, and maybe we can even tie it into how you getting out or whatever, but like always feeling like there just was something that you didn't do. Like, if only I had done this. And it's kind of perpetuated by comments like that. When you're first starting out, you're like, well, I haven't been to the real, in the Navy, it's the fleet or whatever. And, if I hadn't done this deployment, and it's always just like, you're never quite enough. What do you think about that? And how do you think that ties into the idea of just like culture and your tribe, I guess, so to speak?
Well, I mean, I think it's good to have a little fear about what you don't know, about, what you haven't experienced yet. So it keeps you honest, right? And so it keeps your ego in check when you know that you don't know everything yet. But as you get more comfortable, I think it was probably my O5 or my lieutenant colonel battalion command, which is closer to like 16, 17 years of service before I felt like I was walking in a job that I was fully prepared for, and it wasn't going to be bigger than me. And it was I still learned a whole lot in that job. But I mean, I felt like I brought some street cred to the game. But it took a while to do that. And I think it's something you have to guard against as you grow in an organization, is that you don't become those people that you remember hearing in your ear, that kind of marginalizing, or that trying to take you down a couple notches to make sure you don't your head doesn't get too big. You have to kind of be careful with that. And I really appreciate, and maybe because I'm a woman, I don't know, anytime there's intersectionality of some sort, whether it's race or sex or something like that, or gender or something like that, it causes you to look at things a little bit different than somebody who might be in the majority, if you will, or the status quo. So I mean, it causes you to think more about how you want to respond to situations, and kind of approach it from a different perspective. I think that's somewhat helpful. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but that's kind of my idea, is to think about, do I want to be that person that I didn't respect or enjoy early on in my career, that was kind of browbeating or marginalizing me, or do I want to be the kind of person that people look up to, or people respect a lot more for the way that I appreciate them and where they are in our organization and in the organization's life, kind of, if you will.
As somebody who is in for a while, do you have anything that you're like, man, I wish I had done this, or if only I had whatever checked this box? Because Brock and I, we were only active for 4 years, so it was easy for us to leave going, man, if I feel like I didn't do very much, I only deployed once, or I didn't deploy at all. I mean, as somebody who that you had just recently retired, you were in for a substantial amount of time, do you have anything like that?
Well, if anybody says they don't have regrets, I think they're lying to you. I mean,
Sure.
we all have regrets, because if we don't have regrets, that means we did it perfectly, probably, right? I think you always want to leave an organization better than you found it. I mean, I think that's a goal I hope that a lot of leaders have. As I was coming out of service or getting ready to retire, I think, and as I still talk to my friends and subordinates who are still in the service, I think we're getting much more mature with the conversation about the holistic human that is a soldier, as a sailor, as an airman, as a Marine. And I think that is huge. So being able to start conversations like that, they didn't get finished while I was in service, and they're still not finished now, but I think we're listening a whole lot more. I mean, 20 plus years of war, if it taught us anything, it taught us that we're not bulletproof, right? And that we have vulnerabilities, and those aren't bad things all the time, and that we need to think at the holistic level, or the cellular level, for humans, not as bulletproof egos, because you can only do so many tours, and you're gonna sacrifice a whole lot of things when you keep going back to the well like that. So I think that didn't get finished for me in uniform, but I'm getting to play roles now where I have conversations. I get to be a part of groups that have a bigger conversation about the soldiers and sailors, airmen, and Marine, and mental health, behavioral health, well-being, resiliency, all those conversations. Those were not conversations that I had early in my career, but I feel like now it's much more a part of when we talk about the whole person concept, or or readiness. That's part of the conversation now. So I won't say that's a regret, but I'm glad that that's progressing even after I left service. So
Sure.
Was there a specific point in time where you noticed the conversation shift and show a more concern for, like you said, the whole person, mental health, etc.?
I think probably so. I mean, like you said, 20 years plus years, we were in the global war, if you will, and conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's so you're shaped by the events that you live through, right? So when I first joined, I was I was commissioned the year Desert Storm started. So the 100-hour war, everybody, the war was almost over before we could, get started with it in Desert Storm. The first time we were in Iraq and Kuwait. And I think everybody in my generation, so 9/11 happens. I'm about 10 years in service at that point, and everybody was in a rush to get to the war, right? So we couldn't wait to get over there because we didn't want to miss our war, right? That was the thought process with my generation. And then the guys and gals that were in such a hurry, I'd see them a couple years later, and they're about on their third or fourth tour in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they were tired and they were spent. And I think we, over after, 2 or 3 times to the well, you were like, hey, maybe this isn't the greatest thing. Maybe there is more to life than, playing soldier or people are on second and third marriages and things like that. So, or kids that, they missed a lot of events for. So I think as we started seeing people either decide to leave the force for that reason, or we saw things like suicide rates and other things, domestic violence, all those metrics that go along with not watching, our resiliency and looking for ways to, make our resiliency better. I think that was a lot of where it finally started rising to the level of, senior leaders where they're like, hey, we need to put some, if we don't maintain our weapons, they don't fire for us. And so the same thing goes with our people. We had to look at ways that we can make our people more resilient and, do the maintenance that we need to do so that they can be their best, so they can perform for us like we need them to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I wonder if going forward, if the conversation around maintaining like our weapons, I like that, viewing your soldiers as weapons in a way, if the conversation starts to change around the glamorization of like deploying, or like literally, as we were just talking about, that like never feeling like you're enough. And that's so evident in the fact of everybody trying to like get to the front lines, because that's what we hold in like the highest esteem. We view, in the Marines, I'm not sure the Army specifically, but I know in the Marines, like people look for the stripe on their pants, on their dress uniform, and they look for the combat ribbon. Like that's the very first thing. And that just basically means that you are something. And that is a really quick way to like really have your expectations, I think, let down about your time in the military and your role that you serve. Because when you get over there and you get that ribbon and you come back and realize that that's not the road to fulfillment, you're going to be sad. And, it leads to a lot of the things that you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone. I mean, we call them slick sleeves. If you don't have in the Army, on your right shoulder, you wear a patch for the unit you served in combat with, and you can wear it for every, so depending on which unit you were in, you wear that patch. And if you were in multiple units, you could choose which patch. But forever I was a slick sleeve, and I mean, I didn't get to the fight until 2005. My gosh, I'm late to the game or something, just because of virtue of when my unit rotated into combat, right? And once you, after about a month or two of seeing what you see in combat, you realize it wasn't all that, right? It wasn't, I thought it was something it wasn't. I mean, I learned a lot and I grew a lot from the experience, and I won't say that I don't. It was an important part of my development. But it can't define me. It's not what makes me, necessarily.
You brought up something earlier, and I didn't get a chance to kind of like extract it at the time, but you were mentioning the intersection of like gender and race, and how those things like may play into like marginalization in the military. Were there any opportunity, or not opportunities, but like instances where you saw or maybe felt marginalized being like a woman in the service? And especially like, it's hard for me to imagine being a woman in the service 20 years ago like that, compared to now. Like I see the problems that we still have now with sexual assault and like all of these things, and it like hurts me to even think about how bad it probably used to be. Was there, or I don't know if you feel like sharing, is there ever a time when you maybe felt that?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I think it's interesting probably with my generation, and I'm glad it's changing, and I won't say changed because it's I don't think it's a past tense yet. I think it's still it happens in pockets, but I remember, so I was an athlete, so I was a good runner and I was fit. So I mean, because I could run, because I could do those things, I had a leg up on other women, right? And I wasn't expected to be, as fast as guys, but I happened to be in some cases. And so they left me alone in a lot of regards. But there was limits to places I could serve and units I could be in, and those were the units that they got to do a lot of cool stuff, and you move through the ranks faster in. And things were said, offhanded, comments, or something, either people would say things in passing or whatever, and you just learn to live with some of that conversation because you realize you could buck it if you wanted to, and maybe I did a few times, but you realize real fast that you weren't going to get very far in the conversation, and you would get marginalized quicker if you popped up every time somebody said something that might offend you, right? And so you just learn to stay down, and it's that nail that's up too high that gets hammered down. So but I feel like that's not the case in it. You're allowed to say when something isn't kosher, doesn't feel right, doesn't sound right, isn't right. And in fact, we're encouraged to call that out when we see it happening, not just to ourselves, but to others, right? I think now. Um, and I really appreciate that. I would say when I think about, a lot of things that would happen out in the culture, out in the civilian world would be stopped at the door from coming into the military until Me Too. And I think when Me Too happened, I really saw a lot of the gender comments, gender discrimination. I won't say they fell away, but people would call them out. It was like that thing that happened in our society at that time. We didn't stop that at the door. It got to come in the house, and the things that were happening in our culture writ large began to happen inside the military, which I think some of the changes that were starting to happen, say in 2015, 16, 17, 18, with opening of the gender, no role was off limits. Women could serve in any role that they could compete for, and they could, physically do. I think that's probably one of I would say, if I had a proudest moment, was being a part of some of that, changing of the guard there, where we actually let people, it was more of a meritocracy than it had ever been. If you were capable, you were allowed. And I think that was huge. Whereas before it was all theoretical. Well, a woman can't serve in that, serve in that role because, she'll, there was all kinds of fallacies about what we could and couldn't do rather than what we could or couldn't do, so anyway.
It's interesting for me to like think back to the handful of women that I had served with. And one thing that they all had in common, as guys generally show our appreciation and love for somebody by making fun of them and kind of like smack talking trash. You're like, if you walked into any of my shops, or if you listened to like Brock and some of our buddies at a barbecue, you'd think we hated each other, and that's just, as a guy, that's just how we talked. And every time I would work with a woman who was newer into the Navy, I think that was always very shocking to them to like hear the way that these friends interacted. And they would always talk about how, this shop or the Navy or this job or whatever has given me such thick skin, because once that girl kind of comes in and is like part of the shop and is friends with everybody, she wasn't off limits either. I mean, she got the trash talk, she got roasted and stuff like that. And some of them, it was a hard adjustment, and we kind of had to learn to, okay, we need to, she doesn't appreciate that. And then, others, they kind of adjusted, and we're like, no, this is how all these guys are showing me that I'm their friend, that they accept me. And so it's funny to see the difference. Some girls built that thick skin and they would throw it right back at you, and some girls, they did not like it. And so you're like, okay, my bad. That's how we all like show that we care for each other, kind of thing. That's kind of really the only experience that I have as a dude that I can speak on that.
Well, it also, I think it opened the conversation for other entities that were marginalized, I think too. I mean, you start with women and you say, let's open that conversation, right? Let's let them into all the roles and let them be a part of the same camaraderie that men are, and not let them miss out on locker room talk, because that's
Sure.
part of the building of the team, right? We just have to be respectful about it. But I mean, if you think about our openly serving men and women, or our trans or binary populations, I mean, those people, I think women were, the probably the same thing that happened as the services were desegregated, that happened when race, then when women were opened into more roles, the conversation widened, and that respect that we had there could then be shared with our trans community, with our LGBTQ communities. I think it makes us receptive, and gets our antenna up to be more thoughtful about all the conversations that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
You had said something earlier about how, like, the idea of like getting women into more prominent roles in the military was something that started off in kind of just general society, but made it through the kind of walls of like the military. Are there any other like issues that you see that you think that the military is insulating away from, that they should be kind of embracing? And I think that it just really represents like society kind of moves slow as it is, and like the military kind of by default is like almost even a couple steps behind that, just because we're, I don't know, want to be a certain way and kind of like have these really high standards, which is good, but it also isn't, certainly isn't super progressive. And I mean, women make fine leaders and better leaders than males 9 times out of 10, much less emotional on things, and fill those roles really well. What, like I said, what other issues do you think that the military is insulating out of?
I don't know if I can specifically draw any particulars. One thing I would say is that, and I have a son that's 22. He's a senior in college, getting ready to graduate, and go on to more education. But I think, the military is a representative, or it should be, of the country we serve, right? And so as you see the dynamics in our country changing, I hope that we bring some of that same diversity and inclusion into the military. So where the World War II Army looked one way, the military that we have today looks much different in complexion, in gender, and in roles that we play. So I mean, I like the fact that, when I remember we moved to the DC area, and I'd come from a southern, we had been in Texas, and probably predominantly a white community, not very many, maybe some Hispanic, not a lot of diversity. And my son has some friends over for play video games, and every one of them are from a different community, right? There's Asian, and there was Hispanic, and there was African American, and there was different people from the Middle East. I mean, I love the fact that he didn't have very many white friends. I mean, I think it was unique that he had all these different variety, and he didn't see the difference. They were his friends, right? And I think that I want to see a military that gets to that point. And I think some of the change that's happening is happening because we look like America, right? And I hope we don't, we easily can wall off some of our political or some of the other divisiveness that we have in our society. But I really hope we don't. I really hope we're bringing that goodness across when the younger generations that come into our military to serve bring all that they're learning in society into the military, the good things that they're learning. Certainly we got to work on some of the other stuff that's going on with our conversation in America, and the right and the left and all that business. But it teaches you to be, because you have to work together to get the job done. I think that whole, going back to the whole team concept. So,
and while it looks different, it doesn't have to mean lower standards. I think that that's like, everybody thinks that like, oh, well, we're just, letting anybody in now or whatever. It's like, well, if the standards are the same, like if nothing's changing, I'm not
Mhm.
sure what the difference is.
I still have to do however many push-ups I have to do for my age and, whatever. It doesn't change. That's not going to change, just because, I'm a woman or, things like that. So
I will say I am worried about this younger generation. They might spend more time on TikTok than than drilling or any of the obligations that
yeah.
they should be doing. But
As long as we take their brains and start putting into work on some of the big problems like cybersecurity and all the other domains that we find ourselves in now that are different than, say, the land air combat thing that we've been doing for decades or whatever.
I will say if a war breaks out and the only way we can fight it is TikTok dances, my 9-year-old has got that covered.
Cool. Well, I mean, I think we're seeing right now the power of social media and with what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, it's been an amazing way that they have, you need to control the narrative, and they're doing a good job of helping with that through whatever means that they can do. They may not have the technology of the Russian army, but they certainly have using the other wares to make sure that they can get the message out there and get the support that they need to help.
It's funny that you say that. I was just having a conversation with a gentleman that I work with about that, and he was like, "This is crazy, nothing like this has ever happened before." Because you can go on your phone at any time and you can see videos of these civilians whose neighbors just got blown up, And I was like, no, this type of thing's been happening for a long, long time. We're just at the point now where it's right here. It's at our fingertips. Like, you can see how gruesome it is. Rather than reading a fluff piece in the newspaper about it, you are like watching somebody's actual video of this missile coming in, and it's heart-wrenching to watch that kind of thing. But it is it's interesting how social media has kind of changed the way that we get our information and our news, and I think this gentleman that I was talking to is older, he older than me at least. And so it was interesting to see him kind of like have this light bulb moment of like, this has never happened before. Like, this is terrible. It's like, no, you're just seeing it for the first time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have to modernize our weapon systems so that we, keep up with technology. We have to do the same thing with our tactics. And sometimes those tactics are going to take on different asymmetric kind of approach that we haven't used before to make it effective. So
what were some changes, I guess, in tactics that you maybe saw throughout your time? You talked about how you changed from like, I will butcher the verbiage, but kind of like one type of unit to another, like earlier on in your career. What types of changes, I guess, did you see as a result of? Can you kind of like, I guess, start with explaining that?
Sure. Well, so I mean, I came on active duty right after the Gulf War, 1991. So the Berlin Wall had just come down, so Cold War is over, but it's still kind of in its infancy, and we're moving through the spectrum on what that looks like in the global environment. And it's interesting because when you start out your career, you're usually at the tactical level, right? The platoon, the squad, the platoon, the company, battalion. And as you spend more time in service, you go up to different levels where you see different things. And I think probably some of the things that I saw mostly, and remember, about 2/3 of my career we were at war, right? So I kind of keep that in my context. I think we realized, like I was talking about a little bit earlier, that resilience was a really important part of what we needed to be doing to keep service members in service, retention of people. I think one of the things that I saw us do better over time as I progressed was realizing that people aren't disposable. Because if you think about a conscription army or a conscription service where everybody served, went in and did 2 to 3 years, whatever. And, when you had the draft and everything, when you have a volunteer force, people can do their time and leave, right? They just like, I mean, you guys said you served for 4 and then you decided to go do something else with your life. We need a certain percentage of the people to not go somewhere else. We need a certain percentage to stay in the force, because there's a whole, I mean, to train you to be a good infantryman or artillery or aviator or whatever it is, it costs a lot of money to train one person to do that. And so realizing that, we're not just going to go back and get another one of those. We need to make sure that we make investments in people. We need to make sure that we give them quality of life where they want to stay. We give them education so they want to stay. And so figuring out, I think, I would say probably after 9/11 is where I saw us do a little bit more effective job of figuring out how to retain the quality people that we need to, because you don't get a colonel and, you have to, it takes 20 years to make a colonel in 06, right? You don't get one of those. You can't just go back and get another one of those out of the ROTC department, at XYZ University. You actually have to make one, right? It's not, and you don't, not everybody assimilates into the military culture. So there's some attrition that needs to happen, right? So we can get new blood. One of the things that we're doing a better job of now is understanding that talent is a commodity. And just like corporate America, the military has to figure out how to, be very strategic in keeping quality, talented people in the service so that we can continue to do what I think is important, that what we do for our country.
I can't help but think that that's true in terms of just like, I feel like the military is in drastic need of kind of a shakeup in terms of the incentives, because you can't just throw money at people anymore. Like that's not, and I think that they know that. The whole change in like the retirement system from the high 3 to the BRS, I think they know that the average tenure of people is dropping significantly, and a little bit of that comes with maybe not as active. Like we don't need as many people. We're not. I mean, the Ukraine thing aside, we're not in like wartime really anymore, and don't need as many people. But you still have to have those people. What do you think? And I'm sure that you had plenty of conversations about keeping people that were maybe on the verge. How do you think about incentives, and maybe there'll be some correlation to not in the military?
Yeah. So I think, we only need to keep 17% of the enlisted force stays to retirement in the Army. I don't know what it looks like for the other services, but I got to believe it's not much different. And probably about 20 to 25% of the officer corps stays to retirement, meaning stays 20 years, right? So that's, you don't need everybody, but what we also need is people to go back into society, and join the Guard and the reserves and other things like that. But the experiences that you have in service when you go back into society, you're also a recruiter in many ways for the next generation of people to come in. But one of the things that we got wrong that I hope we're getting right today is it used to all be about needs of the service, right? Needs of the Army, needs of the Navy, you're going to go here because that's where we need you to go, right? Instead of thinking about, what's the impact of me sending you to Thule, Greenland, or, Fort wherever that you don't want, lost in the woods or something like that. We need to think about making sure that we do good fits for people and their families, which is not something that we necessarily considered early on, that people want to have families, that their spouses also work now. Majority of homes that have two parents, they both work, right? And so I think keeping in mind the things that keep corporate America vibrant is the same thing that keeps the military vibrant. And so we need to be thinking about quality of life issues like that, as opposed to throwing money at. Now there are times when we throw money at it, for quick fixes, for certain specialties or things like that. But I think the Gen Z and the tail end of millennials, they're a lot less motivated by that than they are the whole work-life balance thing we talk about, which it shouldn't be. If COVID taught us anything, it taught us we had to get that straight, right? Because we were living and working from our homes. But I think those are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we're trying to win the war on talent for our service.
I like that. The war on talent. That's a good term. It's, I think back about like when I got out, and I would have told you, yeah, I was motivated by money, but it actually, I wasn't at all. I got out for that home life balance. My wife hated where we were stationed, and it wasn't a good place for kids and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, I had to get out for and do what was best for my family. So I've been under the misconception myself, until you like really think about it, that no, they just didn't offer me enough money. No, I got out because it wasn't good for my family.
Yeah, we have to think about not just the next job you'll do, but the next 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs you'll do, because we need a certain percentage of the force to stay with it, right? So that we can develop and grow the force and have senior NCOs and have senior leaders. And if we don't listen to people early on in their careers, they will vote with their feet, and we'll have to go back and get another set to train, and that's expensive. I mean, it's not it's just like when we're asking for billions of dollars for Congress, we better make sure we're being good stewards of that money, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just listening to your people, like if they had listened to me when I said, hey, I just this is why I'm getting out. I would my life would be much easier if I was over here stationed at, wherever, then I would stay in, but I'm being forced to stay here. So I have to get out. Well, then maybe let's address that. And if it makes sense to keep this person who's, has all these qualifications, we spend all this money to train them up. Well, maybe let's look and see if we can't just switch them over to there on their next duty station or whatever and help them out, rather than just saying, tough toddlers, you're where you're at.
Right. Yeah. And that's that disposable mentality that I think we had, that we've learned did not serve us well. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, family has got to be like the number one attrition reason. I literally can't think of anything else that probably even comes close to that. The sum of all the other reasons probably doesn't even equal half of family. I have to imagine.
Which is weird, because we brand ourselves as such a family service, right? It's a family. You come into the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, it's a family. But
your family is the people not your actual family.
If the Army had wanted you to have a family, they'd issue you one.
Yes.
That used to be the mentality, and we have to change that. And again, I think that's one of those culture things that we're going to learn a lot from iGen, or Gen Z or whatever, as they come through. I'm hoping my son's generation is, not that he's chosen to serve, because he was a military brat for 18 years, so he gets it. But I want us to bring some of what's being demanded in corporate America today from the workforce. I want that to be demanded of the military, because then we can definitely get the talent that we're, talented people to stay.
I'm thinking of just like the current state of workers in America. And I mean, these are very driven like COVID and just all these other problems that are driving this. But like, if you're looking for a job right now, this might be like the most leverage that you've ever had and might ever have, like, period.
Right.
Like, people really, really need quality people, and there might be a really strong delay on how that impacts the military. But if you're a young person, there's just like all these other, we've got freaking YouTube stars that are 15, 16 years old. And like, what kind of incentives can the military offer them other than just the satisfaction of like serving their country, which maybe that's ignorant and I'm not trying to put it down, but like that's kind of the appeal. And there may need to be something more that's offered to kind of, like you said, recruit top talent and address cyber issues and really like a forward techie future, I guess.
Yeah. No, I was a chief people officer since I've been out of the military, and it's totally the pendulum has swung back into the employee's favor, and I think that's not a bad thing. I think what it causes leadership and corporate leadership as well as the military leadership to do is to not to placate or coddle them, but to actually listen to them and what their desires are for what their development needs to be. I mean, you need to make sure that you and not be short-sighted when you hire somebody. You're not just hiring them from that job. It's for the future jobs that they might do with your organization, because we know that retention is much cheaper than attrition, right? And so we need to make sure that we're making the investments. And I think when an individual feels like their company or their organization is doing that for them, and they're listening to them and doing the things that are in their best interest, not just the bottom line, I think that it's a huge it's that whole trust thing that we talked about early on about why you want to follow the right leader, because you trust them.
Want to start getting into like your transition, and would love to kind of hear about what you do now. But like, I guess one of the big questions that I had going into this interview in regards to your transition is, you've probably coached like hundreds, like maybe thousands of people on like getting out of the service, and you've never actually done it yourself. I would love to hear how it's different as you have gone through it versus like kind of maybe your prior expectations. Transitioning was like a big deal for Tim and I, like even just 4 years. And like, I remember how much I struggled with that. I can't even imagine what that probably feels like after literally a lifetime really in service.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when you're in the military, you wouldn't think twice about going somewhere without your battle buddy, right? You wouldn't leave the post or the base or the fob or the cop or whatever. You travel with your squad, right? You travel with your tribe. But for some reason, we seem to think we take the uniform off and we leave our tribe back at the barracks, right? Or we leave our tribe back at the unit or something. And honestly, that is probably one of the fallacies that we need to, rework, narratives that we need to change. I think is that you need that tribe even more as you transition, because there's so many things that are changing about your way of life. Narrative did not go as I had wanted, and my career did not end as I would have liked. I didn't rise to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I know, shocker. At some point, you don't get picked for a kickball team, and you get told, "Hey, I appreciate your service, but you might want to think about doing something else." And I didn't get kicked out. It was a natural trajectory after the jobs I had done, that if you don't bump to the next level, it's probably time to transition. And so having honest conversations with people about when's the right time for them and letting them shape it is much better than, wait until you've overstayed your welcome or something. Right. So I think that's one of the first things I would say is we need to be having honest conversations with the people that we lead, whether it's in corporate America or in the military, about when it's time for you to go do what is the next thing that you want to do is, right? It's something that aligns with your goals and stuff. For me, one of the good advice pieces that I got was, go talk to your tribe, go talk to your network of people that are already on the other side first. That's one of the first things that I did. Was I had conversations with people I respected that were on the other side, that had transitioned maybe 5, 10, even longer years, and told them what I was interested in, told her the things that I was passionate about, the things that I wanted to be involved in. And it did two things for me. It helped me in a safe place talk about my fears and about what can I do this? Can I make a living doing this? All those different conversations you have, because you've been getting a steady paycheck, and every month. And now that's going to change a little bit, depending on if you're retiring or just getting out. And so it was a safe place to have a conversation about what's next. And then it also, I now have a sponsor who's also fishing for me. Does that make sense? So, I talked to 5 or 6 people that I really respect and trust, and guess what they're doing? They're talking to their networks about one of their, mentees or their proteges that they work with or have a relationship with. And all of a sudden I've got 5 or 6 people looking for me a job, not just me. Right. And so that was one of the smart things that somebody, kind of coached me to do. And that's exactly how I fell into, my first, gig out of the Army was a consulting role that one of my previous, supervisors found that I was a good fit for. So I think that was one of the good things that I was coached on early on when it came to transitioning. The other thing I would say is my superpower during service was compartmentalization. And that can be good and that can be bad. So I think one of the things that I would tell people is to, before you have to go turn in all your supply gear, and literally, you probably have some other things you need to be unpacking before you sign your 214 or whatever. Make sure that you begin to work through those emotional issues and other things that are probably in that tough box that you brought home from Iraq or Afghanistan that you really haven't gone through since you left there. And I think that can go into a lot of different areas. We could talk about more, but those are some other things that I would say too, as well as for transition.
This is like kind of a hard subject, I guess, because it kind of borderlines on part of the reason that this podcast came to be is because Tim and I like maybe didn't necessarily feel like we were equipped to like get out. Like that 1 week thing about writing a resume and whatever, like that for some reason just didn't cut the mustard on like even hitting the tip of the iceberg on like all of the things that you just said. I don't think that I even knew anybody that had already gotten out of the Navy, or and maybe a lot of that stuff comes with just being in for longer and being there for such a short duration. You're exposed to so few people. I guess how do you start? What is the responsibility of the military in taking that on? It's not their job to like set us up with a job when we get out. But do you think that there's room for improvement on their side? And then how can maybe we improve as soldiers or airmen or whatever to kind of like begin to unpack those things like you were saying?
Yeah. So, well, one of the things the first thing I would say is, no, it's not their job to get you a job. But for the first year after you separate, transition, whatever, if you go on unemployment, guess who pays that bill? The Department of Defense pays that bill. So yeah, it kind of is responsibility to us to help them transition appropriately, because that's money that we now have to shift from somewhere else, to pay those unemployment claims, because that bill comes to the DOD, right? So that's one of the things that I would say. And we have to remember that, I don't know how about you guys' transition, but it seems like we want to get every ounce of days out of the person before they sign that 214 and go on. And there needs to be a real live, no kidding, not on the job anymore, not on, on production anymore, time where you transition, which means all the things that it means: filing your VA claim, getting in touch with corporate, fellowships or internships, or, all the hiring our heroes things that are out there now that corporate America is really trying to help with the transition. So, 6 months out is probably a start, and they tell people that have been in longer, you need to start sooner. So, I think it may be unreasonable to say to a person who's on a 3 or 4 year enlistment that, I'm going to give you a year to transition. But I think at 6 months out, very few of those people change their mind and stay in at 6 months, 6 months out from their ETS date. So I think that one of the things that we can do, we put the unit in a bind, because they are not going to get a replacement for you until you're off the books, right? And so they're going to try to get as much out of work out of you as they can. But then we don't do you any favors, because we work you up to the last day. So I think those are some things that we could do to do a better job of, saying, okay, 6 months out to the day you separate, you don't come to PT formation, you don't go on a deployment, you transition. That's your full-time job. And we actually don't just put words to it, we actually put action to it. I think would be something that we definitely could be doing a better job of.
I really like that. I think I noticed probably around my 6 month mark, where I was 6 months of getting out, there was kind of like this shift in Brock, maybe you can agree or disagree, but there's kind of this shift in the higher ranking, my officers, my chiefs, stuff like that, this shift in opinion of me. I went from this good technician to I'm 6 months out. At one point I actually had one of my chiefs pull me aside and say, "Hey, I know you don't give a shit anymore, but like you need to get this done." And I wasn't even the sailor who had been assigned the job. That was the first I'd been hearing of it, but I was kind of like, what? Like, you never told me about this. And why do you think I don't give a shit anymore? It was just kind of this shift in like, well, he's getting out, so forget him. We don't, he doesn't care. We don't care about him. And I think even like you said, Brock and I were only in it for 4 years, so it's probably not fair to give somebody a year. I think even 6 months might be a little bit long. If they had given me 3 months to get my life in order after the fact, that would have been night and day. That would have saved me the 6 months of struggle when I got out to kind of get my feet on the ground and figure my shit out before I actually did. Brock, did you kind of experience that same like shift in the way that you were kind of perceived?
Yeah, definitely kind of like written off.
Yeah.
And like it was a little bit different. Like I was in charge of the shop still up until like I literally had to fly off the boat to go home and like pack because we were
Yeah.
out to sea at the time. Like there was literally no like I was literally working up until the day. So um yeah, so I definitely felt that. And it also highlights too I feel like you could almost maybe even like extend the contract, like make people's contracts 4 years and 6 months.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, maybe they're accounting for having to pay people unemployment anyway, cut that in half, and then you just keep people like, don't even count them as workers for that time and just
Right.
make sure that they're getting into interviews and stuff. Because there are a lot of problems that come up after the fact that like you don't even know what to ask. Like
Mm,
the VA claim, like I dealt with all my VA stuff like 4 to 6 months after.
right.
And then like that's way past the point of like being able to ask anybody questions. You're
Right.
like totally navigating that on your own. And like you don't know when stuff can start being filed. And yeah, it almost like there needs to be another TAPS class like 6 months after you get out. And it's like, okay, what have you
Have
run
you done
into?
this? Yeah.
Yeah, are you having
Yeah.
trouble getting your medical benefits or schooling? Like what have you had trouble with?
Yeah.
um but
Well,
yeah,
and we lose people off the scope once they sign that 214. I think that's part of the issue is that if you could kind of go into so when you come into the military, you go through a basic training, right? You go through a training base, and then you get issued your uniforms, and you get a haircut, and you get all these things, and we put you through training, and then we send you to your unit. There almost needs to be a reverse process of that. When you step off and you've signed your 214, your VA claim is already filed, and your disability rating right then, which opens up doors or not, depending on what your rating is. And then, if you choose the path of education, we've been able to help you, assist you with, the university or trade school or vocational school you want to go to, and, all those other things. If we use the same, rigor that we brought you in to take you out, I feel like we could do right by you better. Personally, that's just my thoughts. But
I have a quote here from you that's kind of I think related to something different, but I think that it speaks to what we're talking about kind of just the same as from a task and purpose article. It said our warrior culture is not set up to recognize seeing problems short of losing a body part or blood gushing from an orifice. And the article was about kind of looking at emotional like behavioral suicide problems, and we can definitely get into that if you want to go that direction. But I think that it's like it's kind of not their problem. And I'm not here to like kind of point my finger or anything, but it's just I think an area that the military as an organization can improve. And like I think I could speak for most people. We want to be prepared and we'll do the work. It's just like sometimes you don't know what to do. There are probably a lot of people that don't care, and that's fine for them. But for those of us that do want to succeed and like do well, then knowing how to go about getting that to happen is a good place to start.
yeah, no, I mean, I'm very transparent about some of the frustrations and challenges I had when I was in combat twice, and I had some, based on the roles that I played. I have some PTSD that's associated with it, and I had to work through that. And because my superpower was compartmentalization, I did not deal with it until it dealt with me, right? And toward the end of my career, as I could see in view that I would be taking the uniform off and really trying to search for who I was and who I was outside of the uniform and outside of the Army. But I think, it's really easy to see somebody who's lost an arm or a leg and see, oh, well, obviously that's going to affect their ability to do X, Y, and Z. But when we don't see some body part missing, we don't make the leap that there could be just as detrimental a disability there or a challenge there as there are with somebody who's lost a body part. And when I was a commander, I really wanted to work hard on, a behavioral health issue and a broken leg were readiness issues in my mind. They kept you from being your best, and it kept us from being our best. And so I think that if we can look at it like in the same way we look at any other infirmity, I think it gives weight to the issues that we have with our mental health and our mental well-being, and it puts it on the same even par with the other things that things that get broken or hurt along the way.
Yeah, I think that certainly the first step is just getting some of that validation there, and like at least the door for people to walk through in case that they need it.
Yeah.
When people are afraid of bringing up problems for fear of losing security clearance and getting kicked off duty stations and stuff like that, I don't think that really sets the incentives up for people to pursue help.
No, and it's exacerbated the longer you're in, because the longer you're in, the higher you go and the more responsibility you're given and clearance and things like that. And so we build this culture of, don't ask for help because they'll see you as weak. And I really think while that stigma is going away, I don't think it's gone away. And I think we have to continually fight to make sure that we recognize that it's important. It's as important for force readiness as any other factor, that is out there that we need to manage, like weapons qualification or physical fitness or whatever is our mental well-being. It's just another indicator of our readiness and our effectiveness, and we have a responsibility when we finish with you to at least, we may not leave you better than we found you in every way, but we need to make a good faith effort to do what we can do to shore up anything that we inflicted upon you while you were in service.
Haven't left you better than you found you. That's funny. Very true. Very, very true. Want to hear a little bit about what you're doing now. You said that some of your role getting out of the service was kind of sponsored by your network and kind of finding that. Talk to us a little bit about what your role is now, what your thoughts are on it, transitioning maybe to jobs generally for anybody coming out.
Sure. Well, I think I'm trying to do the same thing that was done for me in many cases. So I have conversations. I still mentor people that are still in service. And I'm appreciative that they still take my calls, or that they still want to have, they want my leadership. And so, I share with them, some of the things that you struggle with as you get out, besides having to match your clothes, which you never had to worry about before.
That is a real problem. I can tell you.
You can get away with yoga pants in a Zoom call, but you can't do that in a boardroom or something. So, anything from that to the VA, navigating the VA, which we all know could be better, right? And I hopefully with some of the initiatives that I've been reading about more recently, I'm hopeful that is. I'm an eternal optimist. The VA challenges me on a regular basis, though. And then, just making investments in the other parts of your life that we sometimes put on hold until we leave the service. I tell people that needs to be as part of every decision you make about staying in or getting out. Don't just wait until, somebody's got divorce papers pending for you, make sure that you're having those conversations all along the way. I think that's huge. As far as the work that I do, I'm involved in a lot of nonprofit and volunteer organizations related to women in the military and veterans, whether it's in the mental health arena or others. I like to think that those are complemented by the experiences that I've had in service. Also, what I do for pay, for compensation, is I work for a management consulting firm, a woman-owned, veteran-owned small business that works really closely with the Department of Defense on a lot of different initiatives, and many of them are in the human capital, human resource, resiliency aspect. And so, being able to bring solutions to the services, probably more specifically the Army, because that's the one I'm most familiar with and I work with the most, to fix things that I couldn't fix when I was in uniform, to bring solutions, kind of an outside perspective. What I'm really appreciative is the people that I served with this is why you never burn a bridge, because those people are now in the seats that I used to sit in. And so they will have conversations with me as they're looking for, new innovative ways to take care of the force. So I'm really appreciative that I get to keep having those conversations now that I've taken my uniform off.
I want to point out to anybody listening that this is a 27-year service member that is still working and needs a paycheck. If there's one thing that I cannot stand is the joke or like the running thing about people retiring and that they're just going to like coast off into the sunset and like not have to work when you get out. It's bogus. Like you do need a job. Like, and you're a great testament to that. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, and even if you didn't need the money, you need to find a way to spend your days that is gratifying and where you bring value and have, are valued, I think. So I can find no better place to do that than in the organization that I just left, right? And being still part of that in some way.
You think that you have a louder voice in the position that you're in now to influence the organization that you were once a part of? And why, if that's so, why? Because I think that's a problem.
Well, I don't think it's louder. I think it's a different, I'm whispering in ears as opposed to standing in front of and giving orders. So I think that's probably, I've just changed my approach. I think that's probably how I would say it, is that I use the opportunities I have and the relationships that I've built over the years to have conversations with people. And I'm not held back in any regard now. So I'm not trying to make the next rank. I don't have anything else they're going to put on my uniform that, shows that I, accomplished some different goal or something to get a medal. But I really relish the opportunity that I get to have to keep having the conversations that I really enjoyed having when I was in service. So being able to influence and shape and coach and anytime you can tell somebody where the pothole or the IED is before they have to hit it, it's always a good thing, right? So they can avoid it, right?
Does that not being worried about, getting that medal or one more thing on the uniform, is that a little bit more liberating and allow you to act more free than maybe you did in the Army?
Oh, definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
you're not that I did anything in the Army for a rank, but I mean,
Sure.
Certainly you have bearing you have to keep, obviously, but just decorum, right? But it is freeing because it's all about what your motivation is, right? And so if my motivation is not to make the next rank or whatever, then you're going to get the God's honest truth from me. You're not going to get something
Sure.
that smells that looks pretty but doesn't smell so good after later or something.
Sure. Yeah, I get it.
I guess what does that look like, that role look like on a day-to-day basis? I think of the handful of like senior officers, I guess, that I've talked to about like what they do since they get out, I think 90% of them are consultants. So that just must be a very popular title or very like broad reaching for a number of things. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what that looks like, I guess, on a day-to-day basis and what types of things I guess you're doing?
Sure. Well, Reveille is not at 0600 every morning.
Oh, thank God.
But it's not far off because I still want to keep myself fit and I want to, the dog isn't going to let me get slouch. I mean, he still needs to be walked and, we still want to make sure we're doing all the good stuff there. I probably spend anywhere. I mean, I because we can do so much stuff remotely now, I work out of my home. I do a lot of calls, Zoom calls and Teams meetings with folks both in the government and outside the government, related to whatever project I might be working on, or just having conversations about projects that we might work on together. So that, I probably spend anywhere from 4 to 5 hours a day doing that, depending on what day of the week it is. There's room in there for golf when I want to play, or bike rides and things like that. It's not the linear 9 to 5 necessarily that you see some people go into. And I really like that flexibility. For one, that gives me, if I want to go do something a little different or need to take more than a lunch hour, I can do that. But I'm not killing myself. I'm not punching the clock. And I continue to get to do other things in my free time, like things that I'm passionate about, volunteering for different organizations or being a part of my local community, which I think is my third chapter that I'm going to start, and not too distant future. So
Yeah, I guess is the quote unquote consulting market, is that like something that's in high demand, or is there a large need for that coming from the government, DoD, whatever? Because like I said, all of these people that I've talked to, they're all consultants, and they all literally work with the people that they were just working with.
yeah, well, and I mean, some of it you need because I mean, like you said, it takes a long time to build a kernel, right? And you don't want to just let all that, all that experience walk out the door, because who's going to help, train the next generation of folks? And so, a lot of what I do is coaching folks that are in the roles that I used to play in, and I think with the DoD specifically, you see that with a lot of senior NCOs and officers that that enter the consulting world. But it's a way to, I mean, certainly there's a bottom line out there, whether you're selling a weapon system or a service or something, there's money to be made. And so, there's the contracting aspect of the government and what the government needs to do to be able to continue to be competitive. But all in all, I think it's more of you see it in corporate America as well. A lot of consultants don't just work with the in the public sector, which is the federal or state or local government, but they also take some of those same things that they learned in service and take it into corporate America, and help coach and lead, use some of those tools that they learned in service to help those organizations improve as well. So
Yeah, I'm always kind of interested to hear and kind of like extract a little bit different career opportunities and see what people are kind of up against when it comes to getting out. Kind of want to close out here with a abbreviated quote that I have on you. I did all this research. Don't mean to be calling you out here, but it's a good one. It said something to the effect of, how I spend my time equates to what value I assign to things. I want to hear from you what you think is worth valuing and what is worth spending our time on.
Well, so the genesis of that quote, or that epitaph or whatever, it came from an exercise we did in one of my pre-command training courses, and so and I put it in every leadership philosophy that I ever published or whatever, is time spent equals value assigned. It's a math problem, right? And so we did this exercise where we took and we listed all the things that we said were important to us, the things we valued, the things that were important to us, one to whatever. And then we took our calendars for 6 weeks and we looked at how we were spending our time every day, however many days, a week you work and how many hours a day. And, did you see the things on your values list that show up in your calendar? Yes, no. And so what we found was we're spending a lot of time doing things that weren't on our values list. And so the learning point was, I need to make sure that if I say this is important to me, that I'm spending time doing it, right? And it shows up regularly in my cadence in my daily life. And that has changed over time for me. I mean, in the beginning, single lieutenant, no kids, no spouse, looks a whole lot different than it does, now, right? 30 something years later. But I think the things that I value now are things that are gonna outlive me, for one, and the things that I can invest in others and see them succeed with. I think those are the things that I find myself showing up more in my calendar now than maybe previously.
Like that. It's so weird when you kind of are called on the cards on, you're like, oh, this is really important to me, but you're like, okay, well, what are you doing about it? And sometimes there's a large disparity in between those two.
I think that's super important for progressing, being successful at anything in life. And that's one thing that I try to take from Brock, actually, is Brock is really good at recognizing when, you're spending all this time spinning your wheels, so to speak, but you're not making any traction. So we need to pivot and okay, this actually is not important to me. I need to focus on what is important to me. And I think that's a very, very good way to make sure that you're always progressing and eventually becoming successful in anything you're doing, whether that's at home, being a husband or a wife, father, mother, your job, whatever. I think that's very important.
Well, and I don't know if this happens for everybody, but here's how I know when I'm off. I'm shorter with people, I'm intolerant of people, and I'm not as joyful
Yeah.
on a daily basis. When I start seeing that creep in my psyche or whatever, then I know, hey, something's not right. I need to recalibrate. I need to get
Yeah.
back on track.
Yeah, I like that.
Or I guess, how do you recalibrate? And maybe we can take some things from that.
Well, I was not a big fan of mindfulness, but I'm a huge fan now. So starting and ending, and as often as needed during the day when something gets me out of balance, I use things like, we've got so many apps out there today that help with that. Even just some box breathing or some of that is helpful to just reset your head and get some more oxygen to your brain. Spend some time in physical activity. That's another huge way you can do it. And you don't have to run the New York Marathon. You just have to get out your front door and, get around the block once and set reasonable goals for yourself. And yeah, those are ways that I love bragging about my kid and watching talking to people about all the things that he's involved in, and, sharing the parts of my life that bring me joy with others. I think those are some things that I use to help keep myself balanced.
Like that. I'm a big advocate for walking. I somehow in the last 6 months, I really have started walking a bunch. I probably go on 2 a day now, just get some work done, go get a good reset for 15 minutes, come back. And I've got a nice pathway worked into the ground around my neighborhood now. Are you reading anything interesting right now? And where can people go to follow along with you or reach out to you if you want that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I would never say no to there's a lot of social media platforms on there, and I'm on most of them, but I would say LinkedIn is probably if you want to connect with me through LinkedIn. I'm Angie Holbrook. I'm on LinkedIn, and I pretty much take all comers. So if you want to have a conversation with me, or you're interested in something we talked about here today, I'm certainly open to that. The other part of your question, I jumped to the second part first. Your first part was,
are you reading anything good?
Oh, about reading anything?
Yeah.
I knew it was in there somewhere. I'll be honest. I am reading right now. I am reading Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown, who I'm a big fan of. Brene Brown, and anything by Adam Grant or Simon Sinek seems to show up in my Audible or my on my Kindle or whatever. So those are definitely ones. But I mean, I do some fiction too. I love any kind of spy, crime, thriller, legal thriller. Those are ones that I also enjoy too. So,
well, legal thriller, that's a category I did not know existed.
Yeah. Well, my kid's getting ready to go to law school that next year. So I'm trying to get smart on it so that when he becomes a lawyer, I can coach him, right? I can say, oh no, you got to object to that when you go into court.
Right. That's funny.
It sounds like maybe still some time to convince him to go JAG or.
Hey, if I can, I will. I'm always advocate for service to our nation. So.
Awesome. Angie, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah,
thanks,
thank
guys.
you.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Your listenership helps me better educate people like you and the rest of our nation's military, both past and present, on building a successful life outside of military service. If you're looking for more ways the top vets are leading more effective lifestyles, building businesses, and using the resources designed specifically for you, press here for a selection of some of the best clips. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date, and I will be talking with you soon.